Hi again, everyone. So next up on this stage, we're going to hear from Tim Bartz. Tim is the pre-sales consultant for Artificial Solutions, and he will be talking about the 9 killer questions that you need to ask about conversational AI. Tim's going to explain the key concepts that you need to consider in conversational AI, vital questions that you need to ask about vendors that are pushing what he calls their shiny wares, and decode the technical jargon to tell you the difference between what really matters and what's just marketing hype, which I think all of us could use. So over to you, Tim. Thanks for joining. I think you're up, Tim.
I am. I don't see me. Am I connected? Hello, hello, hello.
You are connected. I think you need to share your slides.
Yep. I have no option for that. Oh, wait, there it goes. The screen was just blank there. I apologize for that. I'm not sure why. Okay, I see some flickering, so I'm going to stop and try again. Voila, that's much better. Okay, well, thank you very much. I am Tim Bartz, pre-sales consultant with Artificial Solutions based in Switzerland. And today we're going to walk through 9 killer questions, which I guess is a bit misleading, really talking more about 9 of the killer issues, the top most important issues you need to make sure you consider while you are building an RFP. First of all, I am going to talk a little bit about some tips, just general, not so much specific questions. But one really important thing is that you need to focus on the business objectives. Although you're buying a piece of technology, and obviously it needs to fit with your technology requirements, the real driving force behind a conversational AI platform is what are your business objectives. If you don't have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve with it, the likelihood is you're not going to make a good decision. So make sure you know what is the purpose, why are you getting into conversational AI, what are your goals, what are the benefits and savings that you see for yourself. I'd also recommend that you stay away from yes/no questions. One of the reasons for that is because almost everyone's going to answer yes, and quite often they'll be accurate in that. We all know that with enough time, enough money, enough resources, almost anything can be done. But what you're really interested in is what can be done right now, how complex is it, how difficult is it to implement, and how much might it cost in the long term. Another thing, just from the conversational AI perspective, is don't focus so much on what specific languages are supported or on the claimed number of intents that is supported by a particular platform. Language support can always be added. In all likelihood, any vendor is going to be able to support some of your languages right away. And what you're looking for more is how easy is it for them to add additional languages down the line that you might require. Likewise with intents. Looking at the number of intents that are supported doesn't really tell you much about the underlying platform, because there's a lot more to conversational AI than simply recognizing a simple intent. I think going back to the clear business objectives, it's good to make sure that you have a clear idea of the complexity and the costs that you have for various use cases. So in building this up, you'd want to say, okay, these are our business objectives, these are the use cases we're using to define those. And as part of the RFP, you want to get an idea of how difficult will it be to implement them, how much time it's going to take us, how much can we do on our own, how much are we reliant on the vendor, and how much is it going to cost us. So in conclusion, make sure you consider what the timeframes and budgets are. How much do you have to spend? How soon do you need to get things to market? How long are you willing to wait maybe with some functionality that might not be there out of the box? So we can move on then to those 9 topics, the 9 questions that you need to look at. The first one is around intention recognition accuracy and the flexibility around recognizing intention. So like I said before, total number of intents isn't really a valid criteria. Many platforms don't really have a limit on it because it doesn't make sense. Where there is a limit that's present, quite often it's actually tied back to cost. We'll give you 30 out of the box. If you need more, then it's going to cost you more. So you really want to make sure that that's not something that's being pushed. A conversational assistant should be able to recognize the intents in its domain of knowledge, and that shouldn't be limited by any particular number. Another thing to consider there is looking at close intents that are very close to each other, but aren't quite the same, because what you don't want is a conversational assistant giving a generic answer. example I've got here might be from an airline. Can my kid check a bag? Can my kid bring a bag on board? Both of those are in the general area of children and luggage, but they're different questions and they should have different answers. You don't want to send a user, for instance, to a web page that has all of the luggage restrictions and say, yeah, the answer is in there somewhere. You really want to recognize exactly what those precise intents are and give the answer precise at each question. And you also want to be able then to incorporate the follow-up implicit and explicit context. So if someone says, can my kids check a bag? Yes, of course they can. They're allowed to check this like an adult. What about bring a bag on board? That question, what about bring a bag on board, makes no sense on its own, but in the context of the question you just asked, it makes a lot of sense. Yes, of course, your child, in addition to checking a bag, can bring a bag on board. Now, there's implicit context, things that we know because of maybe what the IP address of the user is, what particular bot they're using. If they're logged into a system, we might know a lot about them, where they live, what orders they've placed in the past. If they're an employee, we're going to know their position in the company, what their role is. If they have sign-off authority, what they're able to purchase. All of those things are implicit. And there's also explicit context. That's what the user themselves says. So the example before, can my kid check a bag? What about bring one on board? The implicit context there, the explicit context is their child and something to do with the bag. Another really important thing that I think is often overlooked is negative conditions. So it's all very well and good to train a classifier to recognize intents, whatever that positive intent might be. But sometimes you want to be able to exclude things. You want to say, actually, don't recognize this intent. It shouldn't match in this particular instance. More specifically, that happens where you want to recognize a positive intent in almost all instances, but maybe you want a couple of exceptions. So if we use the airline as another example, if someone says, I want to bring some type of animal on board, can I bring a dog on board? The answer is generally going to be yes. But if it's not a dog or a cat, the answer is generally no. So you're going to have an intent recognition. Can I bring my horse on board? Can I bring my squirrel in the cabin? Those you're all going to have one answer for. Those register as one intent, but you want to be able to quickly and easily exclude the dog and cat because they actually, from the perspective of you, are a different intent and they have a different answer. You want to make sure you don't have to do a lot of coding because out of the box, classifiers cannot do that. You're always going to have to do something to say, okay, the general intent is matched, but now I actually need to exclude these couple of edge cases because I have a different response to that. Another issue that comes up more and more is the ability to handle multiple intents. When customers come in, they don't always have just a single question. They might have multiple questions and they might give them to you all at once. And just like a human agent, you need to be able to recognize those specific intents and to sort them out and to walk through them in the order that makes the most sense. So it's not necessarily the order that the user is given them in. If the user comes in and says, I need to install a new version of Office and I need to have my password reset. You're probably going to want to deal with the password reset first because they're not even going to be able to get into the computer to do the installation until that's solved. So you need to make sure that you say, okay, I've got multiple things here. I'm going to make a list. I'm going to go through them in the order of priority and handle them one after the other, just like the human user would do. I actually put these in a little bit of misorder because I also wanted to say you need to keep in mind that people are going to interrupt or misunderstand. So as you're working through a process, in addition to that initial intent recognition, what sort of process do I got to kick off? I want to book my holiday. Okay, let's walk you through the HR process. A person might interrupt halfway through, not with the answer to the specific question in that process, but with a request for information or clarification. When do you want to take your holiday? Actually, how many days do I have left? You need to recognize, okay, that's not an answer. You don't want to get the user into a loop where you just say, that's not a good answer. Tell me how many days you want to take off or when you want to start. You need to recognize that's a separate intent, go off, handle that interruption, just like a human being would again, and then come back and pick up the process wherever you left it off. So you want to make sure that the platform is capable of doing that, ideally without any work on your part. You have to code in complex conditions in order to handle that, particularly you have to do that in multiple places. That's going to be a lot of work, and down the line, it's going to result in a lot of cost just trying to manage all of that. So the final thing is it's also good to get an understanding of how the model is built, how it's tuned, and how it's optimized. Particularly with the case of machine learning, you're dealing quite frequently with a black box. You throw a lot of training data at it. Vendors will promise you, don't worry, the computer is brilliant, it will solve all your problems. That's never going to be the case. You want to understand how does it use the training data, where does the training data come from, and in particular, it's important to remember that classification models degrade over time. So how is it as time goes by that you can tune it and optimize it to achieve your optimum intent recognition? And so you can actually see what is it that's done in order to keep intent recognition high. Another issue that goes along with these is you want to be able to protect your existing investments. A lot of organizations have already invested a lot of money in conversational AI. In some cases, they've used particular platforms. Maybe they've done small one-off FAQ bots. In other cases, maybe they've had higher investments. They've invested in their own building and training their own classifier, or they've built their own named entity recognizer. When you switch to a platform, you want to make sure you don't have to throw that all away, along with all the money you spent on developing it. Ideally, you want to be able to continue using those out of the box with no modification to them. So you've protected that investment and you can actually continue to develop it and make it better and better. Side by side with that, though, it might be that long term you say, okay, we've built something, it works pretty well, we're happy with it right now, but in the long term, we'd like to integrate that into whatever technology platform we have done. We want to make sure that there's a path for you to do that. Ideally, again, you don't want to have to start from scratch and rebuild the entire thing. So you want to understand, what can I do with what I've built already, not only to use right now and maybe for the next 2-3 years or maybe for the next forever, or what do I need to do if I want to integrate that into the technology platform that I bought? What work is involved? Can I do it myself? Am I going to be reliant on vendor professional services? Do I need specialist skills? Those are questions you want to understand the answers to. The next point is around conversational data. And to me, I think this is one of the things that's often overlooked. The big hype is around machine learning and classifiers, and you can get bots to understand things and give halfway decent answers. But we're really missing where the real value of conversational AI is, and that is in what your customers and what your employees are saying to you. Because it is a conversational system, that means users can say whatever they want, whatever's on their mind, whatever they're really thinking, which is quite a change to something like an IVR system where it's press 1 for this, press 2 for that, or a web page where you've got a drop down with a limited number of selections. People can actually express fully what they're thinking, and you have access to all of that data in the logs. So some things you want to make sure of are, first and foremost, that you own that data exclusively. It needs to belong to you, because you need to keep in mind that some of the vendors who make these conversational AI platforms are now or will be in the future your potential competitors. You obviously don't want to be giving them access to that data. So make sure that it's yours and yours alone. Beyond that, you want to understand how broad is the information that I can get out of this conversational AI platform. You really want access to that voice of the customer. What did my customers say? How can I analyze it? What are the concerns? What issues do they tie together in their minds? What competitors are they bringing up? If all the access that you have is to simple volume metrics, okay, you had X thousand conversations yesterday and there were X interactions between customers and these were the topics that were most discussed, that's not really giving you insight into what the customer wants. It's not giving you the ability to drive business value from it. It's just saying, okay, I built a bot and people are using it or they're not using it. Beyond that, you want to understand, how do you get access to that data? So you need to know, does the vendor just provide a proprietary interface? You have to use it, you have to learn it, you're limited to whatever it can provide, or if you want an extension, you have to go back to the vendor and again with a professional services bill, say, can you change this for me or change that for me? Ideally, you want to be able to access all of the data using your own existing BI tools. So if you're using Tableau or Jaspersoft or Power BI, your data scientists and business analysts from day one know the tool and are able to access that data and start generating reports and dashboards and usable data that you can do something with in the future. Correlation to that is, how flexible is your querying to the data? So you need to really be able to look at complex issues. You need to be able to execute fairly complex queries. Things like, I want to look at all customers from Spain who logged in between 8 p.m. and midnight, had a question about a competitor, went on to the purchase process, but then eventually abandoned the process. Because what you're looking for there obviously is, okay, late evening, people are doing something, they're talking about competitor products, but they eventually abandon the purchase. You want to be able to really zero in on that and figure out what's happening. And in order to do that, you need a flexible method to query the data that you have. In addition to that, ideally, you're also able to export that data so you can use it externally. You might want to create a snapshot. Maybe you want to build an Excel spreadsheet that you're going to share across the department. So if you can export it, you want to understand how you do that, how complex it is, if it's out of the box, what formats are supported. Just make sure that you have that functionality. Another issue, and again, I think this is something people don't think about, is, are you able to augment the data after the fact? So when you create a natural language solution, quite often you'll be able to maybe take some information in it. But just like with any system, you're not going to think of everything, and new things are going to evolve in the future. And ideally, you can go back to old data and retag it with that information. You can think of it similar to a database. You've got a lot of information in it. But you forgot something, you can always add a new column, and you can actually go back and run queries against the data in the other columns in order to update that. Likewise, with your natural language data, maybe you decide, actually, I should do some sentiment analysis on that. You can put it in the solution so that future information has that sentiment analysis, but you also probably want to be able to go back and add sentiment analysis to all of your previous conversations. So make sure you've got the ability to retroactively go back and update the data set that you've got. Just finally, obviously, you want to either see if there's some sort of base dashboard that can be provided out of the box by your vendor, and in particular, you want to know, what can I do to update that? Am I reliant entirely on the vendor to make any changes, or do I have full control over that? That's sort of a correlation with being able to use your own tools, but if you don't have your own tools, you do want something that you're able to use. Another very important issue, and this is on the minds of most organizations because these are legal requirements and the fines that can be associated with them are quite hefty, is data security and data privacy. So you want to make sure that not just the platform, but also the vendor themselves are compliant with whatever standards you need to operate under. Those might be GDPR, they might be CCPA, and you also want to understand, are there any implications for how the product is hosted? If it's hosted in the cloud, then they're not really compliant, but if you host it on premise and they can compliancy, you want to really understand what your options are and what the possible impact may be to you from compliance issues. Again, just to reiterate, make sure that you have full ownership of the data and you can do whatever you want with it, and that the vendor themselves doesn't have access to it, unless, of course, you want to share with them for whatever reason. And more specific to that, you want to make sure that you've got a flexible method for managing data privacy. You've got the ability to handle PII, personally identifiable information, in a way that meets both the legal requirements, but also your requirements as a business. So ideally, you want the ability to set a retention period for it. So you might say, okay, I can retain the PII in my logs for a year, and after that, I want to set off an automatic process that will wipe it out. You probably want, during the running of a conversation, to be able to maybe mask that information or pseudonymize it. Asking obviously just replaces information with maybe X's. So if a customer says, my credit card number is 4111, whatever it might be, you just X that out, so you're not writing that into your logs. Pseudonymization means you're actually tagging it. So you might, in that case, tag it with CCN to indicate credit card number. That ties back to using the data. You know what the information was there, but you're not actually storing the personal private information. So you want to be able to do that either in real time, so as the conversation is happening, before it even gets written into the logs, to be able to do that, and also then retroactively. So after it's put into the logs, maybe for some reason you want to retain it for a month or two in case of follow-ups, but you want to be able to then retroactively go back and mask out that PII if needed. Likewise, you want to make sure that there are tools from the vendor that help you do this, that you don't have to either wade manually through log files or have to build your own tools. You really want tools that if a customer comes to you and says, hey, tell me all the information that you have on me, you can just run a quick query through your conversational logs and say, here's the data. And when that customer comes back, maybe under GDPR, and says, I want you to delete it all now, likewise, if you've got a tool that manages to do that for you, so you don't have to do that as a manual process. So next issue is language support. And like I said at the beginning, I think the total number of languages isn't the right question. More likely than not, any vendor is going to be able to support at least some of your languages. What you're really looking is how long does it take new languages to get added? What sort of involvement do you have? So some things to look for are if a related language is already supported, does that mean that the process is faster? So for instance, the vendor already supports Spanish and you need Italian. They're both Romance languages. Does that mean that the development cycle for Italian is going to be considerably shorter? So you might even be able to plan on having that coming up sooner. Likewise, you want to know what sort of data do they use for that? Do they use real data inputs? Particularly in some cases, you might say, hey, vendor, I need you to build a new language for me, and I actually have some training data you can use. That's an ideal situation for you because then that language model is already going to be tailored to your business. Flip side of that, of course, you want to be a little bit careful because vendors are going to sell their product to other people, including potentially your customers or your competition. So you want to make sure you don't have private information. Beyond that, you want to make sure that the languages that they support already are continually involved. So someone who's just, maybe developed support for French 15 years ago and hasn't looked at it since then, well, the languages have moved on. Things have evolved, they evolve on a continual basis. So you want to look for regular updates to what their language support is. And you also want to make sure that the vendor is open to you making suggestions, to you saying, hey, you're missing this in a particular language, or I really need you to come and add this language for me because I know this is a big market for us and I want to roll out a new digital assistant there. And next year. So how open is the vendor to your input on what languages they should support and develop? So I know at the beginning I talked about, and I do think this is the case, you really need a driving business reason to do this. Buying technology for technology's sake isn't a good plan. It's not likely going to lead to success. At the same time, when you've got a business driver, you make sure that the technology underlying it is robust, enterprise strength, and is going to do what you want to do. So as you're looking at these platforms, make sure that they have basic critical enterprise functionality. You want to make sure, too, that the support for that doesn't involve a hidden cost. There are platforms out there who offer a very basic model at a relatively cheap rate, but some of the advanced features like version control or extended access to logs or the ability to roll back come at higher price tags. So if that's the case, you want to make sure you know about that up front so you're not surprised later on when you say, hey, you said you had rollback, we need to do that now. And they say, sure, no problem, it's an extra $500,000. You want to understand how deployment can be scaled. And this isn't just in technical terms of, I need to add more server power or more servers in order to handle increased load. This is also looking at it from the enterprise functionality of you're going to be working in multiple countries and multiple languages around the world. How can a particular bot be scaled out to those? So I've developed a solution maybe for an IT service desk, and I've developed that in German, but now I need to roll it out to my Chinese implementation. I need to roll it out to Latin America in Spanish for all of the variants of those different countries. How is it that you expand and scale a solution in a particular language to new regions and to new languages? This is a particularly important issue because you can imagine as you build out your bot ecosystem and you start to add bots different specialized in different areas and you add different languages, managing that becomes a real overhead. So if you've got 10 different bots in 10 different languages, that's 100 different individual instances to manage. You want to make sure that the platform is going to help you support that and keep those bots in sync, because if you don't, you're going to have an entire team dedicated to just doing that, and they're still going to miss things. Beyond that, you want the ability to make sure that an existing deployment can be rolled out to additional channels. So you might deploy, as traditionally is done, to the web, but more and more bots are popping up in apps. They're on IVR systems. They're available over WhatsApp. They're available from Alexa and from Google Assistant. As new channels come up and you roll out to existing channels, you want to make sure you don't have to redo anything. That you can basically just take an existing solution, connect it to whatever the new channel is, and it's going to work straight out of the box. And if it's not the case, you want to understand what work is involved, how much does it cost, who can do it. Again, there's always that hidden cost, so I need to go back to the vendor professional services, and that's why it was so cheap to begin with, because they know down the line they're going to have really high hourly rates. Other things you want to look for, just basic IT functionality. You want to make sure that there's role-based permissioning so that not everyone can do everything. Maybe only the project manager is the only one allowed to publish a solution out to production, but everyone in the team is allowed to at least look at the solution, even if they're not allowed to edit it. So you want that. And ideally, you also want that to be integrated into your existing authorizations tool. So if you're using Active Directory, you don't want to start using another tool to manage access to the tool. You want to just add them to groups in Active Directory and have that automatically picked up. But that's the same for whatever, if you're using another LDAP, that you should be able to integrate with that. Likewise, things like versioning, rollback, the ability for developers to comment on what they're doing, that functionality should be in there. It should be out of the box. And if it's something that comes with additional costs, you want to know that as part of the RFB, as opposed to 6 months down the line, you're halfway through your deployment and suddenly you realize, oh, it's going to cost another $200,000 because we didn't include this in the initial budgeting. Likewise, one big gotcha that I've seen is you want to make sure that it's truly multi-user. Many platforms out there allow multiple users to work on the solution, but often it's a case of the last one to click save wins. You've lost everything else. You really want, when a user is working on something, it gets locked. Other users can have read-only access, but they can't actually edit that. One last thing, again, from the technical perspective, you want to be able to access APIs because a bot by itself isn't all that useful. You want to be able to integrate to your own systems, maybe to third-party systems, to your partner systems. You want to use the APIs they've already published, and ideally, you want to do that with low code. So your solution is mostly built by the subject matter experts, and you don't have to rely so much on expensive IT resources. One other quick thing to consider is what are your hosting options? Ideally, they're flexible. Ideally, the vendor is able to provide you with cloud hosting, so you can just get up and running in virtually no time. If you've got considerations around data security and privacy or internal compliance rules where you say, no, we have to host it on premise, make sure that that's an option for you. And in particular, again, make sure for the gotcha that you host it on premise, but it still requires a connection back to the vendor's servers. It should be entirely contained in your own data center if you want to host it on premise. Likewise, it's possible that things might change in the future and you might want to switch from one to the other. So you want to understand, if we start out with you hosting in the cloud, and you're going to have a very simple bot with no personally identifiable information, that's great. But a year down the line, we actually are going to start to expand its functionality. There is going to be PII, and at that point, our data requirements are that it be in our data center. What is the path to moving from one hosting option to another? How much does it cost? Can you do it on your own? Do you have to rely on vendor services? And likewise, if you're hosting on-premise, make sure that that really means that you are able to manage completely. Your infrastructure teams and deployment teams and hosting teams can do everything themselves without needing to constantly bring in vendors' professional services to help you with upgrades or whatever else it might be. So just to sum up, the really final thing to keep in mind is you need a business driver and you need to consider your total cost of ownership. So again, there are options out there that are quite cheap to begin with. If you're looking for a very simple bot and you don't think I'm ever going to make it complicated, that might be a good option for you. But if you're thinking this is a start and my plan is to eventually have a bot ecosystem of internal and external bots for my employees and for my customers and my users and my partners, and we're going to add functionality to that, you need to understand over the core lifetime of those digital assistants, how much is it going to cost? So things you need to look at are, what's the initial implementation cost? And as you start to roll out subsequent phases, what are the involvements there? You start out small with some of those enterprise features, like I say, they might come as add-ons. So you need to know how much are they going to cost down the line, which ones are we going to need, when are we going to need them, and especially you want to consider how much involvement am I going to require from a customer, or excuse me, from a vendor's professional services, because that can be a true hidden cost. The platform itself is very cheap, but you need 100 days of vendor professional services support to build the simplest bot. That's going to be a surprise to you. Likewise, you also want to consider your ongoing maintenance and management costs. We already talked about the instance where you might have a single bot that's deployed in multiple languages. You need to consider that because they should be the same around the world. There might be some minor variations in them, but if the platform itself doesn't help you manage that, you're going to have a huge overhead and huge internal costs going forward and trying to keep those bots in sync. Going down to the final issue, because I see we're running rapidly out of time. You need to consider that bot ecosystem. So bots aren't alone by themselves. You're going to eventually have multiple bots. Users, by their very nature, are going to go to the first one they find. Just like when they call a call center, they use the first number, so they're going to go to the first bot, but you need a way to manage that. So when a user goes to the IT service desk and says, I want to book my holiday, the IT service desk knows enough to hand them over to the HR bot. Same thing with languages. If a user connects speaking Mandarin, but they're talking to the French-speaking bot, that bot should understand, the user is speaking Mandarin, and give them a path to speak to the Mandarin-speaking bot. So I see Andrew has come up, which I'm guessing means that my time is very close to an end. I don't know if there are any questions here, but I do thank you all for your time, and I hope you got a good overview of what's going on here.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. Fantastic presentation. I know a number of people were commenting on that in the chat, and there's a way to engage folks in the Inspired Citizens channel as well. That's the conclusion of this entire stream for today. We still have some headline sessions going on that are really worth attending over on the main stage, and you can go over there now to hear, can specialized AI chips solve my AI productization challenges? That's going to be from Nick Nee, who's the Director of Product Marketing for AI, Software, and Ecosystem at Xilinx. The sessions on the main stage are going to be going on until 17:30 today. And I'd just like to extend a thank you to everyone who was on this stream today. All three of the speakers were absolutely phenomenal. So thank you very much for all of your work. Really, really great stuff.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.